So today the topic is bite-sized hacks for product managers or anybody who works in software. And I'm really excited to go over this with you all. I think the whole point of this is, you know, sometimes when we go to meetups or conferences or workshops, we want to hopefully take something away from it. And this is sort of like my attempt at like whittling things down that maybe you can try this afternoon or this week, next week, not this weekend. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. So little intro about me. Something that you might not know about me. It's something we do at Podium is a little tradition that we sort of share, like an unusual fact. And I was in the made-for-TV Disney movie, Luck of the Irish, in high school. That's me right there. You can get it on Disney Plus. And a little more about me. This is me. I've got a little kiddo, Gabriel. He's 16 months. My wife, Anna, and yeah, that's at the core. That's all that really matters to me in these. So I do product management after, you know, as like a side thing after those guys. So yeah, who is this for? What's the whole point of this? So I think about like advice that you get, and something that stands out to me is I heard this adage. You guys have probably heard this. I'm probably butchering the quote, but it's something like the best advice is not following advice or something like that. Like everyone who gives advice, it's just their context, their experience, and it makes sense for them, right? So this is sort of like a big caveat disclaimer of like, hey, this seems to be working for me. It might not be the thing that works for you. And just thinking about that as like as sort of a filter. And the second thing is, none of this stuff is really the original. You've heard it before. You've probably thought about it. You've heard it in podcasts, articles, books from managers and other team members. So it's not the most like original stuff. So it might be, hopefully some of it's common sense. We'll see. All right. So here's what we're going to cover. There's a few things. If you can see that, the first thing is we're going to talk about some smart and simple designs that I found that lead to impactful products. After that, we'll cover strategies for working within the company. Just being someone who is great to work with is something that I think a lot about. And then I grew up surfing and snowboarding, and I found some parallels from those cultures in my work as a PM. So we could touch on that. So the first one, smart and simple designs that lead to impactful products. So again, these are just hacks that work for me. I'm going to be covering about 8 of them, and they're quite different, but let's just talk about this, and I'll probably do like a pretty broad stroke of this. And if you want to catch up more, I can refer you to, again, like blog posts or books, or we can just catch up one-on-one. I'm just going to take a pretty broad stroke at some of these. So if you have questions, let's figure it out after maybe. All right. So product market fit. Who here is working on a product that already exists, not like working on something brand new? So most of us. Okay, me too. So when we think about product market fit, there's a definition that you're hiring sales and support as fast as you can. That's sort of the lagging indicator of product market fit. That's how you know that you've sort of achieved product market fit. But how do we identify sort of the early indications of product market fit? So some more like the leading indicators, and there's a methodology that a lot of you probably are already familiar with, but I thought I'd talk about it a little bit today and talk a little bit about how it's worked at Podium. So the idea is, it's it's a survey-based approach that you email 4 questions to your users to uncover how likely they would be to keep using your product, in the sense of like how they would feel if they could no longer use it. So question number 1 is, you email this to all of your users. You survey them and say, how would you feel if you could no longer use this product? And then the 3 questions are very disappointed, or the 3 responses are, you're either very disappointed, somewhat disappointed, or not disappointed. You get that, and then you find out, like you end up finding out some really interesting things. So that's question number 1. In the same survey, you ask, what type of people do you think would most benefit from this product? And so the type of responses that you'll get are people that will describe the ideal user, hopefully themselves in their sort of ideal state. And then you can get an idea of sort of the persona or the type of user that would really grasp onto the product. Third thing is, what is the main benefit of the product to you? So what is the core value that the product is driving? And then let the user articulate that. And then the fourth is, how can we improve the product for you? So let us know the features that are most interesting to you, or the problems that you want to solve. Let's just get those out and start collecting those. All right, so I'll pause there. The first one, let's go back to this. How would you feel if you could no longer use the product? This one, the way you identify product market fit is if you're above 40% of the respondents are in that very disappointed cohort. That's sort of something that we've seen. Sean Ellis, who was early at Dropbox, found this. He was on the growth team, and they found that once they were just north of 40%, then they saw that they were hiring salespeople as fast as they can, support people as fast as they can, and so that was an indicator that, okay, people are really latching onto this. So we've been doing some scoring and benchmarking on our end most recently, and we're on a couple of our products, we're just north of that 40%, and then like a most recent one, Slack, is at 51% very disappointed. And so it's a fun sort of guidepost that we can always say, how can we get our how might we get our product to 50+% or whatever it is. Just increase the group that are very disappointed that if they could no longer use the product. I think what is maybe like the end goal is 100% of people would be very disappointed. So let me go back to the second question, or actually this third question is, what is the main benefit of the product to you? That one's really interesting because then you can get an idea of the value that the people are really deriving from the product. And so that's sort of like at the core of what the product should be for them, and like how they're describing the value. So when you take all of this response data, you can just throw it in like a word cloud and then get a sense of what's really sticking out to people. And then the last thing is, how can we improve the product for you? Then what you really want to think about is, you build 100% of the things that the very disappointed group asks for. And then, so you split your time between 50% of that, then 50% of what the somewhat disappointed group asks for, because you want to convert that somewhat group to the very disappointed group. And but you only build the things that really ladder up to number 3 as the main benefit. And then you politely ignore the not disappointed groups, because they're never going to capture or understand the value of the product. And so whatever you build for them, they'll never be satisfied. So it sort of automates the roadmap for you in a sense. Moving on, another hack that I think about is, if you're building a new product or a new experience, we have sort of a saying here is like, does it pass sort of the criteria of, is this experience simple? Is it useful? Is it fun? And the fun part is sort of sometimes thought about at the end, like how might we make this a little bit more fun to use, a little bit more of a fun experience. And that's just something I think about that is an easy, quick hack to think about as you're planning for something or about to release some code. Do that quick gut check. An example of that I think about that not saying that we overlook, but sometimes isn't as obvious, is just thinking about, well, being really deliberate about quality. So building really high quality products takes an incredible amount of discipline, amount of behind the scenes discipline, especially as your team grows. That's Todd Jackson, who ran product teams at Dropbox. So an example of that is, don't ever sacrifice quality, even if it means stopping the presses at the 11th hour. Sort of a story that I had was when I first learned about this tech world and startups. I was fortunate enough to join an early stage company called Scan in San Francisco, and the company was focused on tying offline events to online events, like offline transactions into online transactions. And the way we did that was through a little iPhone, Android app that scanned QR codes and barcodes. And we were finding that we wanted to redesign the app into a second version, and we saw that all of the positive feedback in the App Store it was a fast app. Fast and simple were sort of the two main benefits that we wanted to really dial up in the second version. And we were about to release we were about to send, deploy the app and send it through the approval processes at the App Store. And we saw that like the speed wasn't as great as it could have been. Like we really had this high bar, and we really wanted to just be like about 50, 60 milliseconds less than where we were able to. So the experience was, you launch the app, it goes into a camera, and then you could scan a code. But the experience from launch app to code scan, it wasn't at that sort of threshold that we said it would be double the speed of any other app out there if we get it to like this threshold. And so we almost shipped it, and then we stopped, and then we stayed up all night. People ended up falling asleep, and we got it to that point where it met that mark, and then we shipped it. We were lucky enough, a few times this happened, where like any app developer, you always want to be above Facebook in the App Store rankings, and we did that a few times. So that was a fun one. Fun to see that old interface. Okay, so shifting gears from sort of like the first part to the second part about strategies for working within the company, and just working with teams throughout a company. So something I think about a lot is our work, whether you're a designer, a product manager, whatever you do, our work requires leadership, and leadership requires good relationships. So the better relationships you have with people, the stronger your team will be. And I think about that a lot, because the stronger the relationship is, the better the communication is, and the better the communication is, the more trust there is with the team. And so a second part of that is sort of this concept of lose the ego. So I can tell you like an experience I've had is like, sometimes I'll get in this mindset, and it happens, and I need to be better at it, but where like I think through a problem, I write a nice narrative about it, I put it in the roadmap. It's like, in my mind, it makes such great sense. I've got data, charts to back this thing up. And then I'll like maybe show it to someone cross-functionally. They're like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then I'm like, wait, like, don't you get it? And I'm just like, this person's like, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, like, they got to get it. Like, these guys got to figure it out. Like, it's so obvious. And that's where like the ego comes in, and it's like, no. Like, of course they're not like on the same page as you. They didn't do like 20 hours worth of research, whatever it is. They're thinking about something completely different. It's a complete context switch into my world if I'm talking to them about it. So just thinking about losing the ego in every interaction and every situation helps build relationships across the company, and it helps strengthen teams, and it helps strengthen the mission of what you're doing. Another hack, be the reiterator of the vision. We have to do this. So it's so easy. This comes from like a Steve Jobs quote that I saw when he was early days at Next, the startup he did after he got fired from Apple. He was in this room. It's like a PBS documentary. It's fascinating. It's worth watching parts of it. I think it's really cool. But he's in this. He's being interviewed by PBS, and you see him working with his team, and he's saying, "Look, like there are a bunch of people in here that left their jobs at Apple or big, great companies, and we're working on something massive. And this is where it's going to be. It's going to be this, amazing thing." And he's like, you have to be the reiterator of the vision, because people are so in the weeds of what they're working on that they have to zoom out and step back and every now and then just to know, like, all right, our goal might be 1,000 miles away, but each step that you take is actually making progress towards that goal. And just you have to be there telling them, like, hey, we're getting there a step closer, even though it's so far away. This hack number 4, avoid one-size-fits-all communication. So what I mean by that is, if I'm giving somebody an update about how sort of the status of a product or a project is going, it depends. What I communicate is very different. What I communicate to like a CEO or a head of product, the way I communicate that is very different than as I would to like a customer success manager or someone in like accounting. And so you always got, at least for me, I don't want to say you always, at least for me, I always want to be thinking about, if I see somebody in the elevator, what's the 30-second pitch update for them of what I'm up to? So if it's the CEO, I want to think about, all right, what does winning look like for them? And then speak to the update in that 30 seconds of what it is for them, versus a customer success person in like a 30-minute training about really the same project. So I really think about tweaking those types of updates or communications for the individual, and that helps with that same mission of building relationships, because when you build those relationships and by more communication, it increases trust, and then it furthers the mission of the team. And then be a crap umbrella. So my team so this is something I think about a lot, and I always sit at the end of sort of the hallway where like a lot of people are walking, and the team is sort of tucked away from sort of the foot traffic. And I do that strategically so that people, if someone wants to talk to an engineer, I'll just like, hey, how can I help, right? And those are little tactical ways of me being a crap umbrella. And my team actually made me a mug with that emoji on it, and it's sitting on my desk right now. But just thinking about like, how can I protect my team? So I learned this pretty early on at the first company I was at. And I always thought about myself as like, okay, I'm a no talent person, because the real talent are the engineers and the designers. They're the one making the stuff. I'm not writing any code. I'm not designing anything. And so how can I make their lives easier? All right, let me take the boring stuff away from their plate, the administrative, uninteresting things as best as I can. And so I think about that a lot, and how that is correlated with the morale of the team. And I found that teams that have high morale ship faster, they care more about quality, and they're just more invested. Oh, this one. So when talking to a manager, indirect approach wins. So this is kind of loaded. So this is one of those ones that I could catch up with you guys sort of one-on-one or whatever it is. But it's more of like, there's sort of a couple of approaches to conversations. You can be bold in the direct, like use brute force and say like, this is my point. Like, let me get this out. Or you could step back, lose the ego a little bit, and then say, okay, what does winning look like for them? What are their incentives? And then rephrase any idea or conversation to really sort of get on the same page with them. And so I think about, if you ever think about like maybe it's not a manager or somebody across the company that you might not disagree with, or you might disagree with. Instead of like trying to brute force your idea, just ask them like, so let me understand this a little bit better. Can you like walk me through like your thinking on this? You in some ways you probably have more experience than I do. I might not be, catching it, or like I might be a little bit slow on this. And then from there, a lot of times you really understand their thinking, and then you might be on the same page or whatever. So this is just one that I've found improves relationships, and it just makes communication just a lot simpler. And again, we can talk more. So hack number 7, celebrating wins. Be deliberate in celebrating wins, whether they're big or small. We have some things on our team where if someone ships their first, PR right when they join the team, we celebrate with Martinelli's right after stand up. And it's like something so like small, but it has become part of our culture. We have a lot of ice cream here. This was after an event that we did at Facebook, and it ended up going really well. But we're always celebrating these things and documenting it, and it becomes part of the culture that we celebrate the small wins along the way. And I think that's important, because if you're celebrating only the big stuff, big things only happen so often. And I think it's important to measure things at a micro level, celebrate things at more of a micro level, because I think as humans, I don't really have a ton of data to back this up, but I think I have a hunch that like if we celebrate things in like a sort of like a little bit more often, then it's easier to feel like we're making progress. And so I think about that a lot. Okay, so getting into sort of this third part. So with snowboarding and surfing, there's sort of a mentality of surf everything, write anything mentality. And with that comes some ambiguity. And so I grew up in Puerto Rico. I was there until I was about 8 years old. My dad surfed growing up, and it was just something that I grew up on the beach. And I moved to Utah, so I didn't surf at all. I started snowboarding. And I moved to the Bay Area. I picked up surfing, and there's this concept of like dawn patrol, where you go surf before the sun comes out, and that was really like scary for me, honestly, because we'd get out to Santa Cruz, and it would just be pitch black. You just hear these massive, like the ocean sounds so scary at that time, and you're walking down the stairs and you get in the water, and it's like you have no idea what's down here. There's sharks, like I don't know. And so the idea of like being okay with this ambiguity, or stepping into a situation that you don't really know the exact outcome, that was just a thing that you do when you're surfing, or like when you go snowboarding, or if you hike in the backcountry. You don't know if it's going to be like that good of a ride or whatever it is. But similarly, when you're building software, there's a lot of ambiguity, and you just kind of embrace that mentality. And I think a lot about how that's sort of affected my work in an indirect way. And when it comes to PM work, do the thing that people don't want to do. Be that person that like asks, all right, like what are the things I can take off your plate that'll make your life easier? And if you're in a setting, with a PM team, and it's like, all right, we've got these 5 things, like, all right, what does everyone not want to do? Okay, I'll just do that. Because again, that builds trust, that builds like, you're being a team player. And I think a lot about how that sort of supports the mission of the team. And yeah, so something else that I think about, back to like that one point about just building trust, is the easiest way to build trust is just performance. Like if you say you're going to do a thing, you do it, and that over time just builds trust. I think that's just the easiest way. And this is an example of our team. You know, we're always working on things, and some things might not be as interesting, like getting ready for a meeting that we're presenting what we've done to like an exec team or whatever. But just embrace doing the things that you don't want to do sometimes. So I think that's it. Thanks so much for coming out here, guys. I'd love to take some time for some questions. Yeah, thank you.